All web browsers are built upon an engine, which is responsible for turning the website code into actual visible pages and logic. Most modern browsers are built on the Chromium engine, of course made by Google, which means that these top browsers are mostly just reskins of their engines and have a lot in common, so it makes sense to start with Chromium-based browsers. Microsoft Edge is Microsoft's default web browser on Windows, being feature-rich but also quite intrusive. It runs smoothly on most systems and often uses fewer resources than some alternatives, especially on Windows. It includes a handful of built-in tools like vertical tabs or a solid PDF reader, which reduce the need for extra quality of life extensions like on Google. However, even if you're already using it, Edge still pushes Microsoft services quite aggressively with prompts and defaults that can quickly become super annoying. The interface also feels a bit more cluttered compared to simpler browsers due to more visible features. Basically, it's built around everything Microsoft, so it's a great browser if you use mostly their tools, but a bloated browser for most other people. Brave is a very privacy-focused browser designed to block ads and trackers by default. It generally feels fast in everyday use because many unwanted scripts and ads are prevented from being loaded in the first place. And again, it has a lot of tools for privacy and to make browsing more anti-intrusive. Brave also has its own ecosystem with optional ads and a reward system tied to crypto. The focus on privacy is good, but does occasionally cause certain websites to break or require manual adjustments, so it's typically used by people who prioritize privacy and perhaps like the reward system. Opera is more of a jack-of-all-trades type of browser. It comes with features like a built-in ad blocker, a basic VPN, and a persistent sidebar for things like messaging apps, allowing users to access multiple tools without having to leave the main window. Unlike other browsers that tend to be purely tab-focused, Opera is more oriented towards multitasking. Now, this is all about the default Opera browser, but there's also Opera GX, which is gaming-oriented to make games run smoother, and has some cool Twitch and Discord integrations, and Opera One, which just seems to be like Opera but with more AI features. But all three are similar in their appeal to users who want a more self-contained browser with multiple tools readily available, be that for gaming or just regular browsing. Arc is a newer browser that tries to change the way browsing itself feels. Instead of treating tabs like temporary things you open and throw away, Arc organizes everything into spaces, pinned pages, and a sidebar that is meant to be the central experience of using the browser. That gives it a desktop-like feeling as if it's integrated with your actual computer. Features like split view are built directly for that idea, so using multiple pages at once feels much more natural than in a standard browser. The interface, which most browsers tend to overlook, looks very calm and has less emphasis on a crowded top bar. While this isn't the most familiar structure, people who get used to Arc seem to always praise it for looking modern and helping with productivity. It tends to appeal most to users who want their browser to feel like a workspace rather than just a tool for opening pages. Yandex browser is a popular Google Chrome alternative in Russia and other nearby regions, and its identity is to be optimized for areas with slower connection and more privacy concerns. It does this through features like Turbo Mode, which compresses pages on slower connections, so browsing feels smoother when internet quality drops. It has a bit more security warnings and protective features, making the experience feel a little more guided than browsers that leave everything up to the user. On top of that, it is tied fairly closely to Yandex's own ecosystem for even things like search features and default services, meaning that it can feel less natural than something like Chrome. But in practice, Yandex browser exists as a default option for Russia and regions with poor internet. UC browser is a mobile-first browser popular in Asia, with a similar use case to Yandex where it takes into account internet speed, data usage, and device limitations. Its main focus is to be as efficient as possible without sacrificing the main content, using page compression and optimized loading to make websites open faster and consume less data, especially on weaker connections. Because of that, the browsing experience will feel lighter and quicker, but occasionally also less true to how a site would actually appear on a full desktop browser. However, there is a lot of privacy and safety concerns surrounding the browser, which when combined with it being mobile first makes it not an ideal browser for people outside of Asia who just haven't grown up with it. It just has its main niche of getting to content as quickly as possible. Vivaldi is a browser that is completely about being customizable. Its biggest defining trait is how much of the interface can be customized, like where tabs go or how pages can either be grouped, stacked, tiled, or displayed. Because of that, it doesn't have one single feel in the same way Chrome or Edge does, and the experience depends pretty much everything on how the user chooses to shape it. The general impression is that Vivaldi is denser, more hands-on, and could get in the way of your work. It gives users a lot more control, yes, but that also means it asks more from them. But if you really care about changing a specific feature or have a very specific workflow in mind, there are tons of interesting options and features for you to play around with. And because it's all Chromium under the hood anyways, the browsing experience is effectively akin to Google, just more flexible if that is something you're willing to mess around with. The DuckDuckGo browser, on the other hand, is intentionally stripped down, with most of its identity centered on privacy and simplicity rather than customization or extra features. features. A lot of what makes it different happens automatically by default, like tracker blocking, stronger privacy protections, and secure connections. That gives the browser a very straightforward feel, where the interface stays simple and most of the effort goes into removing friction without you needing to go into settings to enable everything. One of the clearest examples of this in action is their Fire button, which lets users clear tabs and browsing data instantly, a feature that most other browsers would not trust their users with. Because of its purpose to reduce clutter, DuckDuckGo's browser has less features and mostly appeals to users who want privacy without needing to think about it consistently. And the last Chromium browser is, of course, Google Chrome, the standard and default browser for most people. And that's true for a reason. Google focuses on giving a stable, consistent experience that works the same way across websites, devices, and operating systems. It's very neutral, which works great for most users, but also has tons of extensions and customizations if users want to build upon that. I think the fact that it's made by Google, which makes things like Drive, Word, Ad Manager, and Chromium itself, lets Google Chrome make the most out of those tools, which just makes it an obvious choice for the majority of people. The next two browsers use the Gecko engine instead of Chromium. There are slight tweaks to how it renders pages and its privacy, but it exists mainly so that Google doesn't have a monopoly over every browser. It was created by Mozilla, who made Mozilla Firefox, which feels more like an independent take on what a browser should be, with stronger focus on privacy and user control without completely changing the familiar way of browsing. The interface is still tab-based and easy to understand, but there's now more emphasis on transparency and customization compared to something like Chrome. Features like enhanced tracking protection are built in, but they're presented in a way that makes it clear what the browser is doing rather than hiding everything in the background. Because it's developed by a non-profit organization, it does give off that slightly different tone, feeling less tied to a larger ecosystem. It has similar customization and privacy to other browsers, but its main appeal is that it's disconnected from Google and is still able to hold its own ground as a good browser. Tor Browser is built specifically around anonymity, not as a niche, but the actual entire use case of the browser. Instead of connecting directly to websites, it routes traffic through multiple layers of encrypted relays, which changes both how pages load and how the browser feels to use. Because of that, browsing can be noticeably slower, and some sites may behave differently and a good amount restrict access. The interface itself is very simple and is only used to show connection status and how traffic is being routed. It also disables or limits certain features by default to reduce tracking and fingerprinting, so it has a very specific use case of being privacy first by actually sacrificing a lot of basic features, so the only time people seriously use it is when they need to stay anonymous and not get tracked across websites for whatever reason, or to access certain parts of the dark web and .onion domains. The last popular engine is WebKit, made by Apple, which is actually what all Apple devices use in general to render content, and as such is optimized for the Apple ecosystem while being slightly more restrictive. So let's start with the default browser of all Apple devices, which is Safari. It's designed to feel tightly integrated with the overall Apple ecosystem rather than standing out on its own. The interface is very minimal, with very strong emphasis on keeping the screen focused on content instead of controls, so using it feels very lightweight. It's also closely tied to macOS and iOS, of course, so things like syncing, battery efficiency, and performance are optimized specifically for Apple devices. Privacy features are built in as part of the experience to prevent tracking across websites, and they tend to run quietly without adding extra complexity to the interface. Of course, because it is Apple, there are very little customizability options, with even the extensions being only allowed from the App Store. And finally, Orion is a browser that tries to be Safari but outside of the Apple ecosystem while still using WebKit as the engine. It keeps a very clean and minimal interface, but adds more flexibility in how it actually can be used. One of its defining aspects is that it supports both Chrome and Firefox extensions, something Safari doesn't. So it is similar to Safari in most other ways, but has the customization of modern browsers, on top of allegedly being even more battery efficient. So if you have an Apple device, it might be worth looking into. Thank you for watching.